Have you ever wondered why in Goodfellas, Jimmy Conway was not whacked for assisting Tommy in the killing of Billy Batts? Jimmy Conway was one of the most established and well-known associates for the Lucchese Capo Pauly Cicero. Though he was a respected mobster, he could not become a fully initiated member due to his Irish background, but nevertheless he still was feared and had a vast network of connections. In the film, we see Billy Batts insult Tommy, telling him to go home and get his shine box. This causes Tommy to go crazy, and as we know, he comes back later, and he and Jimmy proceed to whack him with Henry looking on. But this poses a problem. Billy was a made member, which meant he was untouchable, as explained in the movie. But if this is the case, then why was Tommy the only to be whacked and not Jimmy, especially considering he wasn't Italian? Let's dive into it. In real life, Jimmy Conway was Jimmy Burke, and he was subject to a rough upbringing. He was abandoned outside an orphanage at the age of 2 and would continue to be adopted by a plethora of different abusive foster parents. At the age of 13, he was adopted by the Burke family and moved to Queens, New York. He felt a lot of affection for the Burkes and took their last name, becoming Jimmy Burke. Shortly after, Jimmy would hit the streets, engaging in many different illegal activities. At the age of 18, he got pinched for attempting to cash in $3,000 worth of fake checks at a bank. This illegal crime put him in jail for 5 years. But when Jimmy was brought in for interrogation, the cops wanted him to spill the beans of his scheme. Jimmy had been running this scheme with a Colombo associate named Dominic, and the cops knew this. Jimmy kept his mouth shut and was sentenced to 5 years. Mobsters inside jail heard about Jimmy not talking to the police and greeted him with joy and respect for this. Once Jimmy got out of prison, Jimmy's father got him a job as a bricklayer. By this time, Jimmy had grown to a tall, strong individual standing at 6'3", and this job was the moment that would change the trajectory of Jimmy's life forever. Lucchese Capo Paul Vario, who was Paul Cicero in the movie, worked in the underworld of the Union and heard about Jimmy from Dominic. Jimmy began loan sharking and collecting debts. He quickly rose through the mob world, and this is how Jimmy became entrenched in the mob and met Pauly and later Tommy and Henry. This would then lead to a slippery slope down to the night of the Billy Batts incident. But considering Jimmy's Irish ancestry, surely he'd be a target for the mysterious death of Billy Batts, right? Let's unravel this. In the movie after the Billy Batts incident, Paul pulls Henry aside, asking about Batts, and tells him to keep his eyes open after Henry lies to him. But it's clear the Lucchese's had something to do with this since he was last seen at the suite, Henry Hill's club. Even in real life, Henry claims when he went to jail in the early 70s, some of the Gambino crew would bother him about the incident, saying they knew he was involved. Billy Batts was part of the Gambino crew, which explains why they were bothering Henry in the can. But it's clear that blood was on the crew's hands. It's important to factor Tommy into this situation. Tommy was a loose cannon from the time he joined the mob, and his blow-up from this scene led to his demise. From the movie's perspective, the crew that Billy came with may have relayed this incident to the higher-ups of the Gambino family once they realized Billy went missing. Since Henry and Jimmy were rather subdued and tried to de-escalate the situation, the crew that was with him probably thought it was only Tommy who was responsible for Billy's disappearance. And with the heat coming down on Paul Vario about the situation, it would have been him who would have given the okay for Jimmy to be protected and Tommy to be whacked. The real story of how Jimmy wasn't whacked is partially shrouded in mystery, but there are some details that may point to the answer. Jimmy Burke was a very established mobster once he got going within the family. Henry Hill said he was the real boss of the crew and the true brains of many of their heists and schemes. He was a massive earner for Paul Vario and the family. From Paul Vario's perspective, he may have thought Burke as irreplaceable if he were to have him whacked, with the family most likely taking a hit in earnings. Burke had a knack for being ahead of the curve on new money-making methods and had a vast number of connections which allowed for successful heists. On the contrary, Tommy wasn't anything near the level of Jimmy Burke. Tommy wasn't very smart and was an unpredictable psychopath that was a headache. Sal Polisi, an associate of the Colombo family, became crime partners with Tommy in the early 70s and also spent time with him in jail. He claimed Tommy was abusing cocaine during his time with him and also described Tommy as not being a bright guy, or at least not as smart as Jimmy. Henry claimed that the Capo Pauly actually had contempt for Tommy DeSimone. He hated Tommy and even told Henry to stay away from him, saying he was a loose cannon. On top of this, Tommy whacked another guy who was part of the Gambino crew known as Foxy. Foxy was a good friend of Sal Polisi and also was a crime partner next to Tommy for a while. It is noted that Tommy began going out with Foxy's sister, and Foxy knew the man Tommy was. So he went to him and told him to stay away from his sister. But Crazy Tommy didn't listen. Tommy ends up going to Foxy's to discuss this matter, and Henry claims that Foxy walked outside and punched Tommy in the face, knocking him to the ground. Tommy then pulled out a piece, and for some reason, whacked him. This marked the second Gambino family guy Tommy whacked, and many of them knew Tommy did it, which made them disdain him, including John Gotti. While Sal was in prison in the summer of 1975, he spent time with Jimmy, Tommy, and another guy named Dave Iacovetti. Sal was great friends with Foxy, so when he heard the news, he wanted to whack him, but Dave told him not to, and said that, quote, Gotti will take care of him. Although no one knows who was responsible for his death, it's clear that Tommy was a loose screw, and Jimmy wasn't. On the opposing side, Jimmy was too cunning to be like Tommy and make dumb mistakes like him. During the Lufthansa heist, it is suspected that Tommy actually took his ski mask off for a brief moment. Though this story may not be totally accurate, it is said that Jimmy was irate with Tommy for doing this, cussing him out. A disclaimer to mention about these mobsters is that they weren't the best individuals. Many of these guys were bad people, breaking the law, selling drugs, and whacking others, and in no way is this condoned or meant to glorify these individuals. It is just to explain the history behind the secret society of the mafia. With that being said, it is easy to understand why Jimmy wasn't responsible, rather Tommy, who was the one who died by the sword. One more story that seemed to seal Tommy's fate and secure Jimmy's fate was when Tommy allegedly tried to rape Henry's wife Karen. Henry was in jail at the time, and apparently Tommy went to Karen to try to sleep with her, but she declined. When Tommy got rejected for this request, he proceeded to beat her and attempted to rape her. A hysterical Karen went to Paulie to tell him about this situation. But an unknown secret that Paulie was hiding is the fact that he was having an affair with Karen at this point in time. Paulie became enraged after hearing about Tommy's antics. Paulie despised the kid to begin with, but after hearing this, it wouldn't be surprising if Paul was the one who approached the Gambinos and told them who was behind the murder of Billy Batts. All these reasons point to why Jimmy remained part of the family and granted impunity from the mafia code he broke. But in the end, Jimmy's fate still was bleak, since he was turned on by his good friend Henry Hill, who had turned informant and ratted the whole operation out. Jimmy was convicted and went to jail for over 30 years and ended up passing away in 1996 from cancer. The real-life story of why Jimmy wasn't whacked is drastically different from the film and shows a deeper glimpse into the complex workings of the mob. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe for more videos.